الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر.
Welcome to Let the Quran Speak. My name is Sophia, I'm your host. The aim of Let the Quran Speak is to help you gain deeper insights into Muslims and Islam, as it is practiced here and in other parts of the world. In this episode, Loving the Prophet Muhammad, he brought the message of the oneness of God that lives amongst Muslims today. How can we cultivate a deep love for the Prophet Muhammad? And how do we best show our love for him? We'll answer those questions a bit later in the show, but first, the ethics of disagreement. How should we behave when we are in disagreement with others, especially when that disagreement concerns religious matters? Are there any benefits to differences of opinion? What sorts of disagreements are considered natural amongst Muslims, and what happens when differences cannot be resolved? With me to discuss this subject, Brother Shabir Ali, President of the Islamic Information Center. Brother Shabir, why can't we all just agree about religious matters?
Well, in fact, people differ usually on a wide variety of subjects, and it's commonly said that we don't discuss sports or religion or politics and religion because
Yes.
these are the things that divide people. But people have different opinions about sports, about politics, about religion, about many aspects of life. When it comes to religious subjects, there is a certain degree of faith involved, and this is often connected with an emotional attachment to one's belief or faith system. And so people in their discussion naturally get emotional about what they believe.
Now, were there differences of opinion amongst the companions, the people close to the Prophet Muhammad?
Yes, many differences of opinion are reported of them, and some touch upon very sensitive and core issues of the Islamic
Can you give us
faith.
some examples of those?
Well, when it comes to the manner of following the Prophet, peace be upon him, precisely, there is a narrative showing that the Prophet, peace be upon him, gave some of his companions an instruction that they're not to pray the late afternoon prayer until they reached a certain place. Well, as they were going, the time for that late afternoon prayer seemed almost to expire. And so some of them said, well, we better pray it now, because the Prophet, by saying we shouldn't pray until we get to that place, meant that we should hurry up and reach that place in time to pray this prayer. But if we're not going to reach that place, we may as well pray the prayer now to get it done in its right time. And some others said, no, the Prophet said, don't pray it until you get there, and we'll wait until we get there. So they waited until they got there. And the Prophet, peace be upon him, hearing of this difference of opinion, approved of both practices. Some took his words literally, and they did exactly as he said, and some took the spirit of it and acted according to that. So those who prayed early took the words in its spirit, and those who prayed later took the words literally.
So he was comfortable with whatever interpretation they got from what he said.
At least this is what this report indicates. If the report itself is authentic, probably the report more so it reflects the kinds of differences that Muslims were having after the Prophet, peace be upon him, left this world. And it shows the way of resolving this difference by recognizing that there is a literal interpretation and there is an interpretation that takes the spirit of the law. So there's a letter of the law and the spirit, and if you take either one, well, then you are in good faith. What happens often is that some people insist that it must be taken literally, and some people say no, it must be taken in its spirit, and the two parties differ with each other. Aside from this, there are other issues that the companions of the Prophet, peace be upon him, were known to have different opinions about, and those different opinions survived and multiplied as the generations came one after another.
Can you give us examples of some of those issues?
Well, there are several things. One, for example, was the question of the succession of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. Who will be a caliph after him? After his death, some of the family of the Prophet, peace be upon him, gathered in one house, and they were obviously contemplating what might be the next step in terms of appointing somebody to lead the temporal affairs of the Muslims. Meanwhile, the Ansar, some of the people of Medina, the Prophet's city, gathered in a hall, and they were going to decide a person to lead the community. Meanwhile, Abu Bakr and Omar got wind of this, and they went to that hall, and then what ensued was that Abu Bakr was appointed the caliph. And in the meantime, some of the relatives of the Prophet, peace be upon him, were discontent over this decision. Now, this is not a small decision as to who will take charge of the temporal affairs of the Muslims, and yet this is a difference of opinion that arose among Muslims.
Mm-hmm. Were there any differences of opinion concerning matters of belief, as opposed to, let's say, practice or political matters or temporal matters, as you mentioned?
It seems that in terms of the core items of Muslim belief, this is standard and almost universal. The classical Muslim scholars listed 6 items of Muslim belief. Belief in God, His angels, His books, His prophets, the last day, and that is resurrection after death, and in the belief in predestination, or the foreknowledge and predetermination by God of all affairs. So these items seem to be standard, even if someone did not list them in the same order or in the same number. They might have called each item something else, but basically these are the beliefs which are mentioned in the Quran so often that one would hardly expect that anyone could take issue with one of these.
Mm-hmm. What do you think are the benefits of differences of opinion? We often talk about the negatives, or the fact that it disunites us, but what are the advantages?
Well, I think what we have arrived at here is, so far in our discussion, is that there are differences, and yet there is a core that holds everyone together. So what then are the benefits of having this diversity around that core? I think this is the way I would understand your question. So once we have the core that holds everybody together, the diversity in fact helps. It's not an unwieldy diversity that gets everyone floating off in different directions, because there is the core that holds them together. But that diversity helps in that if God had so proclaimed His faith to us in all of its finer details with unmistakable certainty, then no one would have any room to differ about anything, and in fact no one would have any reason to think about anything. But God has made us thinking creatures, and difference of opinion over various superficial aspects of Islam, or we can say the non-core aspects of Islam, because some of these are not superficial. So difference of opinion over the non-core aspects of Islam stimulate thinking and research. People have to think, they have to research, they have to study, and then they have to debate with each other over some of these issues.
I guess it also gives one flexibility in terms of living Islam.
Yes, it so happens that if God had given such a strict sort of definition of every sort for every legal aspect of our faith, then as time changes, we see that some of the old legal precedents would not be valid anymore. But God in His wisdom has given us some broad definitions such that legal scholars could exercise their minds and say, well, this is how that broad principle applies in our time. And what applied in one time may not apply in the same way in another time. And that this allows for scholars of a later time to look at the broad principle and say, oh, that broad principle was applied differently by our predecessors, but given the circumstances that we now face, we can apply the same broad principle, but in a new manner, and that would befit the present time in which we live. So yes, that gives us a great degree of flexibility.
Now, people they enjoy discussing these differences of opinion and trying to hash them out. What is your advice for guidelines for individuals who are trying to figure out which is the best way to follow, perhaps, or what is the best decision to make on a certain religious matter? How do they discuss these issues in a manner that is civil?
Well, Taha Jabir al-Alwani has written a book entitled The Ethics of Disagreement. This book is widely available wherever Muslim books are sold. And it shows us how the Quran itself encourages dialogue, and how the Prophet's advice and the way of the companions of the Prophet, peace be upon him, give us a sort of model on how we can discuss with each other in a civil manner, disagreeing but agreeing to disagree, and disagreeing in a manner that is gracious. The Imam Shafi'i rahimahullah is known to have said that I am right with the possibility of being wrong, and those who oppose me are wrong with the possibility of being right. So he maintains that he could be wrong, and he maintains that his opponents could be right. And I think this is the humility with which we should approach such dialogue, because in principle, if a thing is settled, it is not debated. And if it is being debated, that is just a proof in itself that it is not a settled matter. Because if it were settled, who would be debating it? People don't debate whether 2 + 2 = 4, because we all agree on that. We debate on the issues on which it could appear this way to some people and this other way to some other people, and now we try to get together and put our thoughts together and see whether we can persuade each other that it's the other way, or to be like Imam Shafi'i would have said, not so much to persuade each other, but to learn the truth for oneself. Because it is possible that what the other person is saying is true, and what I thought was true is not so. How much beloved it might be to me, and how much I may want to defend that position, it may be that what the other person says is true.
And of course, many of the subjects that we debate today, even amongst Muslims, are subjects that were debated for hundreds of years. So, they're open questions. Yes,
usually people go with a part of the evidence for a certain point, and they pretend that this is all of the evidence. So usually the evidence points 2 ways. Some people take one half of that evidence pointing one way, some take the other half of the evidence pointing the other way, and each side champions their proof and evidence. Whereas if we come together in a dialogue, we have to bring all of these pieces of evidence together. And that's what usually happens in a court case. There is a defense and there is a prosecution. Prosecution brings one type of evidence, the defense brings another type of evidence, and then the judge sits back, or the jury, or both, and listens to all of this evidence and then tries to put them all together. Well, this is what we should do as Muslims. When we comb the internet, when we read a variety of books, we talk to a variety of scholars. Some scholars say that something is haram, some others say it is halal. Well, right away you know that there's a difference of opinion. And if there's a difference of opinion by people who are educated in the religion and people who are not trying to fool us in any way, well, this is a proof itself that the haram position is wrong. Because in principle, a thing is considered to be permissible unless someone can show that it is impermissible. And if the proof that it was impermissible is so clear, that it is haram, is so clear, then nobody would differ about it. And so we can say, the best we can say is by putting this group of evidence together, that we might say that there is a possibility that this thing is objectionable, or there's something objectionable about it. This is why some scholars said it is haram or prohibited for Muslims. And on the other hand, you cannot say it is actually absolutely prohibited, otherwise nobody would have differed about it.
All right, we'll leave it at that. Thank you for your time, Brother
You're
Shakir.
welcome.
We'll take a break. When we return, loving the Prophet Muhammad.